Hey, kia ora, Marky here with a spontaneous, impulsive video with a shaky iPhone camera the wrong way up because it's easy to hold it that way, and we've been through that in previous videos. So, hello, I am responding to something, that's why partly why it's spontaneous. But also this is a subject that I've been wanting to get my little demystifying pause on for quite some time. So how deeply we'll get into this right now, and how much maybe we'll follow up another time, I don't know. Let's just start and see where we get to. So, okay, let me introduce the channel. This is the Mark the Demystifier channel, and the Mark Demystifier channel generally is about demystifying things, although we do kind of stray off into other avenues like elegant speech, but then again I guess that we're demystifying elegant speech, aren't we? And things like retroactive jealousy is something else that we feature on this channel, but this video is very much about demystification. So the channel really, the essence of this channel is about where a subject is perhaps misrepresented or commonly misunderstood. And it's about kind of debunking some of those myths and making things a little bit clearer. So I've been wanting to do so. In fact, I've done a talk. I did a talk for professionals actually on the difference between things like the differences and similarities in the relationships, I guess, between things like paganism, occultism, Satanism, all kinds of things really. So I did a talk on that. So I want to cover some of the same territory, and it's in response to an article by the Daily Mail, the famous, so those of you who aren't from the UK, the Daily Mail has got a reputation for being right-wing and I suppose the way to describe it, it's got a terrible reputation in the UK, you know, to the extent that, you know, I mean, it used to have a really good TV guide. Back in the day, I used to buy the Saturday Mail for the TV guide, but it was always a bit of an embarrassment kind of going into the newsagent to get it. So, you know, it's one of those, this newspaper's got such a bad reputation that you would actually, you know, buy a top shelf porno mag just to alongside the Daily Mail, so you could slip the Daily Mail inside it and people would think you weren't buying the Daily Mail, you're actually buying the porno mag. That's how bad the Daily Mail's reputation is, really. And it's kind of, I suppose, the readership of the Daily Mail is quite interesting. So you've got the Sun, which is kind of the classic kind of, you know, traditionally the working class paper. Again, I think it's quite right wing, but certainly very prejudiced, very alarmist, very polarizing. The Daily Mail is kind of aimed at people who think they're middle class but probably aren't. So people that kind of have aspirations or pretensions of being kind of educated and middle class, and but really aren't quite there, really. That's the Daily Mail audience. Well, that's my interpretation of it anyway. I'm sure I've offended lots of people, but let me know in the comments if I've offended you. It'd be quite interesting to see what people say. So this is all kind of preamble, really, but the article, I thought I'd try and put a link to this article. So it's online Daily Mail, and what this is talking about is Aleister Crowley, his house, or not his, he's long dead, Aleister Crowley, but the house that he famously owned in Scotland on the banks of Loch Ness has recently, which was vacant and derelict, I think, has recently been targeted by arsonists. And the Daily Mail headline, which was just bollocks, really, really bad headline, it was on the lines of Satanist's house burnt down, and then he went on to say the real life Wicker Man, Aleister Crowley. So okay, so we're going to demystify some of these things. We're going to demystify Crowley, we're going to demystify Satanism, and we're going to demystify that nonsense about the Wicker Man, and we may get into wider things like occultism and stuff like that, or we may not, really. really, but I will cover those in another video. So, okay, so what this video is about in a nutshell then is misinterpretations really about it. So it's kind of demystifying Crowley, really, and demystifying Satanism. So we may demystify some other things along the way. Okay, so yeah, so you're ready for that. So Crowley, you may or may not have heard of him. You may be more familiar with Crowley, because often, you know, it's one of those words that could be pronounced Crowley or Crowley. Ozzy Osbourne famously did a song called Mr. Crowley, which is an excellent song. But it is actually Crowley, and we know this among other things because he wrote some poetry where he rhymed the word Crowley with holy. So that kind of answers that one, unless he was a really bad poet. Some people say he was. I've not studied his poetry. Some of his poetry was pornographic, actually. He either wrote or contributed to an anthology called White Stains, which was erotic poetry. So that's by the by. The thing about Crowley is one of those people, they're such an interesting character. There are loads and loads and loads of anecdotes about him, you know, many of which probably aren't true, but they're all great. You know, everyone's got their favourite kind of Crowley story. So, Crowley was an occultist. Okay, he was not a Satanist. Okay. So we'll get into Satanism we'll talk about Crowley first, then we'll get into Satanism, I think, a little bit later. So Crowley was what we're talking about essentially is what they call the Western mystery tradition, which is occult magic. Okay, which embraces a whole number of things, including things like tarot, and different forms of divination, practices like astral projection, and trying to achieve outcomes in the physical world through the use of magical ritual and magical practices. Okay, so it's not witchcraft, but it's very similar, very strong overlaps with witchcraft. Okay, so witchcraft traditionally, so we'll demystify this a little bit along the way. Witchcraft traditionally a more folksy tradition, practiced by, talking about class a lot in this video, aren't we, for some reason? So practiced more by people of lower social status, essentially. So the traditionally witches, which could be male and female, and we're talking European traditions, and so there would be people in the kind of the wise man or the wise woman of the community that would have knowledge of spells, would maybe kind of do tarot or read tea leaves, and would more likely also be a herbalist and a healer. Okay, so that's kind of the witchcraft tradition, which does include magic, which can include curses, but ritual magic is essentially something that is, I think, more along the lines of a kind of Freemasonic organisation. So it's practiced in lodges. So there are magical lodges. So you have societies, first of all the Rosicrucians, and then you have a society like the Golden Dawn. So you're talking kind of very educated middle to upper class people who are members. A lot of these, so this is a tradition that in the form that we know of it was popular from the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, broadly speaking, and so it's the intelligentsia. So it's quite intellectual. So, for example, the poet Yeats was a member of the Golden Dawn and an occultist. So it's very difficult to talk about this stuff without straying down other avenues, really. But I suppose essentially the what they call the Western mystery tradition and occultism, although it embraces lots of different practices and it does embrace things like making physical things happen on the physical level, it's a kind of a path to enlightenment, really. So you've got the Eastern tradition, which is taught, which is usually with a guru and disciple, But in the West, another route to enlightenment, if you like, was practicing these societies and lodges, okay, and taught as part of a group, and people would progress through different degrees. So, again, if you think Masonic, then that's the kind of structure, that's the kind of vibe that you kind of. So that's what Crowley was into. Okay, so he wasn't kind of, he wasn't your herbalist and your witch. He was not a devil worshipper. Okay, not that Satanists are necessarily devil worshippers, and we'll get onto that. I can feel a part 2 coming on here. Sorry, folks. So the word that we would generally use is occultist or magician. Okay, and Crowley liked to put a K on the end of the word magic to distinguish it from, magicians that illusionists that do stuff for entertainment. Okay, so you have a kind of a magician that can have 2 different meanings. It can be, Paul Daniels, if anyone can remember him, as time's moving on, he's probably old school now. Paul Daniels calls himself a magician, but it's a magician in a different sense. So Crowley would call himself a magician. He would call himself an occultist. Okay, he probably wouldn't call himself a witch. He certainly wouldn't call himself a devil worshipper, and he wasn't a Satanist either. Okay, so that's the kind of practices so Crowley studied with various societies, formed his own society, practiced all kinds of very complex, elaborate rituals, studied a great deal. So we're talking a kind of magic is quite an intellectual pursuit. He also kind of was hugely advanced in yoga as well, so he did embrace some of the Eastern traditions as well as the Western traditions. So he's quite a guy, okay, but not a devil worshipper, not a Satanist, certainly not a Wicker Man, because what does that really mean? And yeah, so hopefully that kind of gives you a flavour of who Crowley was. Now, people talk about black and white magic, okay, and that's a whole complex area. Different people have different understandings of what those terms mean, and actually a lot of people in the occult world don't use those terms anyway. They sometimes use terms like left-hand path, right-hand path. That all gets very complicated as well. Okay, but Crowley was a classic psychopath. Okay, so a lot of the esoteric work that he did was actually about aligning your will with your higher guardian angel. So he wasn't about, kind of death and destruction and unleashing kind of, nasty forces upon the world. He was actually kind of had some quite high ideals in terms of some of his magical work, but he was certainly a classic psychopath. He had a very abusive childhood, and he was a very cruel man, among other things. So he was a big game hunter, and he was a mountaineer, and on one of the mountain expeditions that he took part in, all his colleagues kind of did an intervention on him because they paid for local people to help them. So what used to be called Sherpas, and he treated them despicably, and all his colleagues were absolutely appalled at his behaviour. So Crowley was very psychopathic. Okay, so three things maybe we've demystified about Crowley. So one is his name, not Crowley but Crowley. His magical work was not witchcraft, it wasn't Satanism, it wasn't devil worship. It was actually in many ways quite high. Although he did do some darker stuff in terms of his magical work. His kind of ethos was about aligning yourself with higher things, really. So and yes, very charismatic and charming in the way that lots of psychopaths can be. So he was classic psychopath. So okay, so before I say any more, we're going to go into part 2. So I will see you on the other side.